They laughed when they heard what I got. $5, the lawyer said, and the entire room broke into quiet chuckles and sideways glances. My cousin Claire actually gasped, trying to stifle her grin behind a silk glove. It was like a scene from a bad movie. The black dresses, the fake tears, the smug smiles now that the estate had been carved and claimed. I sat still. Not angry. Not even surprised. Just silent. Because I remembered what my grandmother used to say when no one else was listening. What they see is not always what matters. So I held the check. $5. The kind of inheritance meant to humiliate. A message of dismissal. Until the lawyer cleared his throat, slid out a second envelope, and looked at me directly. Now, he said, let's talk about the hidden trust and the Swiss account accessible only by Miss Hannah Pierce. The room went dead quiet. It was the kind of quiet that hums with judgment. We were all gathered in the small conference room of Latham Row, just off Main Street in a town that still thought it mattered who your grandfather was. The wood-paneled walls, dusty diplomas, and crystal water pitchers tried to dress it all up, but it couldn't hide what this really was, a feeding frenzy in funeral clothes. The will reading. I wore black. Not because of tradition, but because it was the only thing I had that still fit after 3 months of stress eating and answering condolences from people who hadn't called my grandmother in years. Claire sat 2 chairs down, legs crossed like she was posing for a magazine spread. Perfect nails, morning diamonds. She smirked the second the lawyer read her name. To Claire Elizabeth Summers, the property on Pine Ridge, the 2019 Lexus, and the contents of Margaret Pierce's safe deposit box. Claire gasped, then whispered something about, finally, while squeezing her mother's hand like she'd won a pageant. I waited. My name came last. To Hannah Rose Pierce, $5, and the love of her grandmother. There it was. Someone in the back snorted. I think it was Uncle Ray. Claire bit her lip, trying not to smile. Her brother coughed into his sleeve. You'd think I'd be embarrassed. Maybe I should have been. But all I could hear was my grandmother's voice from last summer. Don't ever let them see you shrink, Hannah. When people think they've boxed you in, stand up straighter. So I folded the check neatly and slid it into my purse. $5. I'd once spent more on parking downtown. Claire leaned forward, the victory oozing from her pores. Guess Gran didn't think much of some people, she said, not even whispering. I smiled, just slightly. Not enough to provoke, just enough to make her curious. The lawyer, Mr. Connolly, didn't close the folder right away. Instead, he paused, fidgeted with his glasses, then reached beneath the table. There is, he said carefully, a second matter. Claire blinked. Her mother tensed. Even the cousin who never spoke looked up from her phone. Mr. Connolly placed a sealed white envelope in front of him. Heavy paper, wax seal, my initials on the front. Hannah, he said, your grandmother left instructions that this is to be read only after the will. My breath caught. And just like that, the smirks faded. The envelope sat between us like a lit fuse. I didn't reach for it right away. I could feel every eye in the room pivot in my direction, not with sympathy, but with something closer to alarm. Mr. Connolly didn't rush me. He just folded his hands and waited. My fingers shook as I broke the wax seal. Inside was a single sheet of heavy cream paper, the kind my grandmother only used for Christmas letters and war. My dearest Hannah, if you're reading this, it means I've finally done what I was never brave enough to do while I was alive, tell the truth. I swallowed hard. You were the only one who listened, even when you didn't understand. That mattered more than you knew. The 5 they heard about today was for them the show ponies. This letter? It's the real inheritance. I looked up. Mr. Connolly gave a small nod, and then pulled a second folder from beneath the desk. This one navy blue, with a silver clasp. Claire actually leaned forward in her chair, her smugness now slipping into disbelief. There exists, he said clearly, a hidden trust and an international account established by Margaret Pierce. They are under a restricted access clause, which names only Miss Hannah Rose Pierce as beneficiary and authorized trustee. Silence. No one breathed. Mr. Connolly continued. This account, held offshore under a Geneva-based institution, contains financial assets Margaret managed separately from her U.S. holdings through private equity, early international investments, and, let's say, some remarkable decisions made during the late 70s and early 80s. My hands were trembling now, not with fear, but with the weight of being trusted. There is, he added, an initial portfolio balance of 6.3 million US dollars as of last quarter. Claire dropped her glass. It shattered against the oak floor, but no one flinched. I wasn't sure what stunned me more, the money, or the fact that my grandmother had lived an entirely separate life none of us ever suspected. The flower print blouses, the cluttered kitchen, the church bake sales, they'd all been a mask for something extraordinary. I looked at the paper again. The letter ended with, "The others will be angry. Let them be. They inherited what they understood. You, my love, inherited what you earned, what you were born to carry." My eyes burned. I folded the letter slowly, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it gently in my lap. I didn't look at Claire. I didn't have to. The sound of silence had never been so loud. That night, I sat alone at the small kitchen table in my apartment, the one with mismatched chairs and a single potted basil plant I always forgot to water. In front of me, the envelope, the letter, and a notebook she had left in my old bedroom, the one I hadn't opened in years. I had no idea where to begin. The lawyer had said the Swiss account was under a multi-tier verification system. Some parts were standard ID, signature match. But the final layer? It required something he called behavioral authentication. "What does that mean?" I had asked. He looked almost amused. "It means you have to know her. Intimately. Not just facts, habits, phrases, things only someone close would recognize. Margaret designed it herself." So now, here I was with a $1 million problem I didn't even know how to want. I flipped open the notebook. It was filled with recipes, gardening tips, pressed flowers, and in between, odd little phrases, repeated ones. Butter second, not first. The real moon is quiet. Geneva speaks in threes. At first, they meant nothing. Then, slowly, they began to form a pattern. I remembered the tea ritual. She always followed 3 taps on the kettle before pouring, never 2, never 4. I remembered how she'd whisper to herself in French when she read the paper. How she always told me to memorize our soup recipes backward, ingredients last, spices first, in case we ever had to remember them under pressure. I thought she was just quirky. Now I realized she was training me. I pulled up the Swiss bank's secure login page. Mr. Connolly had given me a code that led to a legacy verification portal. It asked me 5 questions. What does the real moon do? What comes second? How does Geneva speak? What recipe starts with salt? What is the answer after 2 and 1? I typed slowly, heart pounding. Is quiet. Butter. In threes. Tomato lentil soup. 3. The screen went black, then a white message appeared. Bienvenue, Miss Pierce. The truth recognizes you. And with that, an entire world unfolded. Portfolio summaries. Decades of correspondence with a discreet Swiss advisor. Investments in green energy startups back in the 1990s. Silent stakes in companies I'd heard of but never imagined she touched, all quietly grown, tucked away under layers of privacy. At the end of the document, chain was one more letter, digitally signed, dated 2 months before she passed. You were never meant to chase applause, Hannah. That's why I chose you. You see through things, and now you'll have to. I stared at the screen, barely breathing. She hadn't just hidden this fortune from everyone else. She'd spent years preparing me to find it. The next morning, I drove to her old house. Not because I had to, not for closure. I just needed to be somewhere she had been. Somewhere real, before all of this became numbers on a screen and lawyers in suits. The porch light was still burned out. The wind chimes still tangled. It felt like nothing had changed except everything had. I walked around back, past the wild lavender patch we used to trim together, and sat on the cracked steps by the garden shed. That's where we used to talk, mostly in late afternoon when the sun leaned low and the world felt gentle. Back then, I thought she was just my grandmother, sweet, sharp-tongued, fiercely independent, the kind who clipped coupons and used rainwater to rinse vegetables. But now, I saw her in pieces I'd missed before, like the fact she always read The Economist, not for headlines, but for financial trends. Or how she never once asked Claire for help setting up her phone or her laptop but asked me, every time. She was pretending to be less clever than she was. On purpose. One summer, I remember her sitting across from me at this exact spot. I had just failed a calculus final and was drowning in disappointment. She'd said, "You know what people misunderstand about math, Hannah? It's not about numbers, it's about patterns, and once you see them, really see them, they never leave you." At the time, I rolled my eyes. But now, I understood. She hadn't just been teaching me how to think. She had been shaping me to recognize the unseen. Claire never saw the shed, never helped in the garden. She didn't know that the old bird feeder was actually rigged with a false bottom to hold a USB stick. Or that the sewing kit in the linen closet had $3,000 in rolled bills in the cushion. I thought it was eccentric, it was intentional. She lived a double life in plain sight, one for them and one for me. The trust she left me wasn't just financial, it was deeply personal. She had been building it with every pie crust, every coded phrase, every lesson disguised as a joke. Not to test me, to equip me. And I hadn't even realized I'd passed. I stepped inside the shed, still smelling faintly of mint and wood oil, and opened the drawer where we kept the pruning shears. Underneath the shears, taped to the baseboard, was another envelope. Smaller. Yellowed. Inside was a note. "This is where it starts, not where it ends. Don't let them shrink you, Hannah. Use it, change something." And beneath that, a Swiss bank contact card with her handwriting on the back. I arrived in Geneva 3 weeks later, carrying nothing but a single leather satchel and the note she'd left beneath the pruning shears. The city was cold, quiet in the way old, powerful cities are like they already know all your secrets. Snow clung to rooftops and railings. Bells echoed from distant trams. But inside the private banking wing of Thalberg, Rus, the air was warm, clinical, and tense. "Miss Hannah Pierce?" the receptionist asked, pronouncing my name with Swiss precision. "Yes. Mr. Groth will see you now." She led me down a narrow hallway to a discreet room with no signage. The man inside was older, silver hair, tailored charcoal suit. He did not rise when I entered. He merely gestured to the chair across from him. "You are Margaret Pierce's granddaughter," he said, not asking. I nodded. "She told me you might come," he said, sliding a folder toward me. "She said, if she makes it here, let her see everything." I opened the file. There were ledgers, holdings, statements, but also letters, dozens of them between Groth and my grandmother, dating back over 30 years. In them, she referenced every risk she took, investments in renewable tech, in women, run ventures before it was common, in early AI startups that had since gone public. But it wasn't just about wealth. She wrote about trust, about family, about disappointment. One letter hit me hard. "Dear Groth, Hannah is the only one who sees beyond the surface. Claire is loud and clever, but Hannah is deliberate. The others think inheritance is about things. She knows it's about purpose." I blinked away a tear. Another note, dated 5 years ago. "I've begun creating the pathway. If she gets here, it means she had the strength not to fight the noise, but to outlast it." The room felt suddenly smaller. I wasn't here because I had outsmarted anyone. I was here because I hadn't tried to play their game at all. Groth looked at me. "There is one more thing." He pulled out a metal key, small and old-fashioned, attached to a red tag marked Archive 9M. "This accesses your grandmother's private vault, not financial, personal. It is across the street in the archival wing. She instructed that it be opened only in your presence. I took the key with shaking hands. The archive vault felt like a museum, one lit by soft lamps and silence. A clerk escorted me to box 9M. When it opened, I found something I never expected. Photo albums? Dozens of them. Margaret as a girl, as a young woman. In Paris. On a mountain with a man I didn't recognize. Holding a baby that was not my mother. A wedding I'd never heard about. Letters in French, in Spanish, in English. A birth certificate from a refugee camp in Belgium. Documents under a different name, Marguerite Duval. My grandmother hadn't just built a fortune. She had lived 2 lives. One as Margaret Pierce, church-going American woman, widow, baker, grandmother. And one as Marguerite Duval, financial ghost, investor, former intelligence asset during the Cold War, based on the files I found tucked behind a coded journal. The weight of her silence crashed into me. She had held all of this, the danger, the brilliance, the complexity, and never once used it to impress. She had given me the choice to discover it. And now, it was mine to carry. Back in the lobby, Groth handed me one final document, the transfer authorization. This, he said, will give you full access to the trust. But she also included a clause, only if Hannah intends to use it for good. I smiled softly. I do. When I got back to the States, winter had just begun to touch the edges of Tennessee. The airport felt smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I just felt larger, not in ego but in gravity, like I had weight now, meaning a story that wasn't theirs to tell anymore. Claire was waiting in the driveway when I pulled up to Gran's house. She didn't wave. She stood with her arms folded, keys in hand, parked where I used to set up my lemonade stand when we were 10. The irony wasn't lost on me. You've been gone a while, she said coolly. I needed time, I replied, stepping out of the rental car. Her eyes narrowed at the worn leather satchel in my hand. She didn't ask what was in it, maybe she already knew. The family's upset, she started, voice tight. They're saying you manipulated the will, that you... I didn't, I cut in. Calm, not cold. She set it all up years ago. I only followed what she left behind. She looked away. She was always closer to you, she muttered. I just didn't think it mattered. I could have thrown the words back. Could have asked why she never visited Gran in the hospital, why she only came around for birthdays and lawyers. But I didn't. Instead, I opened the satchel and handed her a smaller envelope not sealed with wax, just a folded note in Gran's handwriting. Claire hesitated, then took it. Her hands shook. I turned to the house, walked inside, and let the smell of cinnamon and old pine floorboards wrap around me. The kitchen was just as she'd left it, tea tins lined up like soldiers, the window still smudged from a bird that had flown into it 2 years ago. I sat at the table where Gran used to slice apples, opened my laptop, and accessed the trust. There were new documents waiting. Groth had uploaded a suggested advisory team, but the final decision was mine. I had power now. Quiet, enormous power. But more than that, I had a responsibility. I clicked on a folder labeled Community Investment Proposals, drafted by MP. Inside were pages of handwritten notes from Gran, ideas she had dreamed about but never implemented. Scholarships for girls in foster care, housing grants for single mothers, microloans for local farmers. A wellness center for veterans. She had left me the how, but also the why. And now, back home, the shift began. Not in headlines, not in grand announcements, but in whispered decisions, quiet investments, and a long overdue rebalancing of legacy. The invitation was handwritten like Gran used to do. Just a simple note. Thursday night, 6 p.m. Supper. Bring whoever you need to face. Hannah. I sent it to everyone. Uncle Ray, Aunt Lillian, Claire, her brother, even the cousins who never called. Part of me expected no one to show. But at 5:58, the driveway was full. They came dressed like it was a wake, dark coats, stiff collars, practiced politeness. I served the meal myself. Gran's pot roast, Sweet tea with lemon slices, cornbread from her old skillet. The kind of meal she used to make when someone had messed up, and she wanted to remind them what kindness tasted like. Nobody touched their food at first. Claire finally broke the silence. So, what's this about? I folded my napkin and looked around the table. The faces that had once smirked, whispered, rolled their eyes when I got $5. Now they waited, tense, brittle, unsure of who I had become. I reached down and placed a stack of documents on the table. She left more than money, I said quietly. She left instructions, ideas, a vision. Uncle Ray frowned. What kind of vision? She wanted the trust used for good, I said. For scholarships, clinics, local aid, quiet things, permanent things. He scoffed. You expect us to believe that's what she wanted? And not just you rewriting history? I didn't respond. Instead, I slid the final letter across the table. Gran's words, in her own handwriting, addressed, "To the family I love, and the ones I leave behind." Claire picked it up and read aloud. If you're reading this, it means the truth no longer has to hide behind holiday smiles and fake toasts. Hannah was not my favorite. She was my mirror, the one who saw through performance, the one I chose because she listened when no one else did. Silence. You were all given chances to show up. You chose appearances. Hannah chose presence. Aunt Lillian blinked back something that looked dangerously close to regret. Claire stared at the note like it was a riddle she'd never solve. She really wrote this? She whispered. She did, I said. She saw everything, and she still loved us all. But she trusted only one to carry what mattered. I stood and began clearing plates. No grand speech, no lecture. Just a quiet reclaiming of the room. I'll be setting up the first scholarship in her name next month, I said over my shoulder. You'll get the details. If you want to help or just learn who she really was, the door's open. No one said a word. But, for the first time in years, they listened. Not because I raised my voice, but because hers was finally being heard. 3 months later, her name was etched in bronze. The Margaret Pierce Foundation for Second Chances. It wasn't flashy, just a small plaque outside a restored brick building downtown. Inside, it held a reading room, a free legal clinic, and a single office that always smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. My office. People came in not knowing who she was. They saw the name, maybe assumed she'd been a donor or a local librarian. But I didn't correct them. I didn't need to. Her legacy wasn't a statue. It was in the girl from the shelter who got her first scholarship, in the veteran who found a therapist on site, in the young mother who finally got approved for a small business loan without having to beg for dignity. Gran had always believed that silence could be powerful if it was filled with meaning. So, I worked quietly. No interviews, no headlines, just motion. One evening, as I was locking up, I saw Claire standing across the street. She didn't wave, just watched, eyes unreadable. Then she nodded, turned, and walked away. It was enough. I went home, fed the basil plant I was finally remembering to water, and sat down with the last of Gran's letters. One I hadn't opened. The envelope had only 4 words. For when it's done. I took a breath, peeled it open. You made it, didn't you? Not just to the end but through the fire. I knew you would. Let them talk. Let them wonder. You were never meant to explain. You were meant to rewrite. Not the story of our family. The story of what inheritance can be. Of what a woman can build in silence and pass on in whispers. I closed the letter and stared out the window. Outside, the wind shifted. Leaves swirled in little circles near the curb. No applause. No parade. Just a quiet rewriting of everything I thought legacy had to be.